arresting the growth of snooker. Joe Davis was born 11 miles away in tiny Whitwell, but it was here, within the sight of the famous Crooked Spire, that the man who did more to promote and grow our great game than anybody else, the Sultan of Snooker himself, received his billiards education.
Yes, billiards. Because Joe Davis wasn't simply a 15-time snooker world champion, the Emperor of Pot also lifted the billiards world crown on 4 occasions. Joe was born on the 15th of April 1901, on this very street in Whitwell, in the coal mining hotbed of North Derbyshire. His father, a miner turned publican, wanted Joe to become a boxer like many in the village who'd gone on to great things. But it was when his ever-ambitious father moved the family to a second pub in Whittington Moor that betting enthusiast Fred Sr. had unintentionally gambled on a better future for his young son.
The pub was called the Queen's Hotel. It was very fortunate for me because it happened to have a full-size billiard table there. For no reason at all other than the fact that it was there. And this is where I started to play, at the ripe old age of 11. I was very fortunate, and also fortunate, that the billiards table there had a false floor, about three inches higher than it normally would have been. That enabled me to start playing at such an early age.
Joe progressed quickly, making his first century break in the nearby Victoria Billiards Hall, and rapidly rose through the Chesterfield leagues, becoming the county champion at the age of 13 and turning professional at 18. Joe wasted no time as he moved up through the game's ranks, although not everyone was convinced by the youngster's abilities.
The amazing thing about Joe Davis was he had a lazy right eye, so he had to sight through his left eye. And in fact, in his youth, George Gray said that he will never be a great player because he doesn't sight with both eyes. But Willie Smith said, oh no, he'll be a great player without doubt. And as he proved to everybody, he did become the greatest player at snooker.
He really came of age in 1926 when he reached the World Billiards Championship final. He lost that year and the next to great rival Tom Newman. But by 1928, he was the best in the world and caused a great stir on his return to Chesterfield with the trophy.
We travelled back to Chesterfield, and at least not me realising that there'd be anyone at all awaiting our arrival. But there was a tremendous crowd and the streets were lined with people. Well, great excitement. Wonderful day for me.
He remained champion until 1933, when the all-conquering Australian Walter Lindrum showed he had the beating of the home favourite.
However, his interest was already shifting to snooker. Many billiards players looked down on what Joe himself called an impure knockabout game. One of his contemporaries referred to it as that tomato game. But Joe considered it the game of the future. He noted that at exhibitions the crowd willed the billiards to finish so that the modern, more exciting game would begin.
I was the first one to really exploit it, to develop the snooker as it's played today. That is, in the attacking side of the game. In the early days when people did play, they played purely a defensive type of game. Pot one red and then colour maybe, and then go off for safety, whereas I exploded the thing and made it entertaining.
Joe and billiards entrepreneur Bill Camkin arranged the first professional snooker championship in Birmingham in 1927. Few billiard players joined in, but Joe still faced tough competition from Nottingham-based Tom Dennis. After a 31-frame match, Davis took the title and the £6 10 shillings first prize. Indeed, the two players contested 4 of the next 5 finals. Joe won them all. Moving the final to billiards' great mecca in Leicester Square in 1930 was important as well. Thurston's famous arena added to snooker's growing prestige. As Joe continued to rack up the titles, the beginning of TV broadcasts from Alexandra Palace in 1936 offered a brand new world for Davis to influence as he tried to spread his new snooker gospel. The Radio Times played its part in trying to fan the flames for snooker, talking up the popularity of the new sport. The arrival of Walter Lindrum's nephew Horace Lindrum finally provided Joe with a rival of note, and as a result, interest in the sport blossomed, thanks to two fiercely contested finals.
Well, overseas snooker players came to this country. Con Stanbury from Canada, and Horace Lindrum, who was a nephew of the great Walter Lindrum. He came over and contested the World Championships and got to the finals on 2 occasions. Horace Lindrum was the first player who the public thought could possibly beat Joe Davis. And that is why their 2 finals were immensely followed by everybody. And in both cases, Horace led. But Joe, he got stronger and stronger as the tournament went on, and he had that ability to stay in, and he won on both occasions. Yeah.
Then, Joe's younger brother Fred finally came of age. With war breaking out across Europe, there was one last World Championship final at Thurston's in Leicester Square.
The great snooker battle in London was a pretty hot affair between Fred, here seen in action, and his elder brother. Fred certainly made Joe look to his laurels, but the world champion is still unbeatable, and he won the deciding game with a break of 101, incidentally his 112th snooker century.
Remarkably, the match finished 37-36 after 5 days' play. Joe took the title and the plaudits.
But the honours of the match were fairly evenly shared, even if the cup was presented by Lord Alif to Joe. He himself does not underestimate his young brother's skill.
For another year, at any rate, I'm pretty safe, and it may be for the duration of the war, because Fred next month is due to register for the army, so that might keep him quiet for a while.
A few months later, and the war took its toll, as Thurston's was destroyed in the Blitz. The famous table, like St Paul's itself, remained intact, but it was the end of an era. Thurston's had been comparable to Wimbledon or Lord's as a venue in the nation's sporting consciousness. Joe went on tour during World War II, playing exhibitions as part of a theatre group with an enormous mirror hung over the stage so spectators could see clearly. The championship resumed in 1946 at the Horticultural Hall in London. Davis successfully defended the title for his 15th consecutive win.
I'd been through the process so many times. I thought I'd held the title long enough, 20 years. And I then decided to retire from championship play. There is the trophy. Yes, 1927 was the first time it was played. A fellow named Davis, Joe Davis, won it. And there seems to be 1 or 2 other Davises on there.
He didn't stop promoting the game he loved, he just felt that his dominance was proving counterproductive. He continued to perform for the cameras and in exhibitions. Joe barely rested as he toured continually, always in demand, always on the road, fitting for someone who at a very early age had lived in a pub called the Traveller's Rest. It's one of the few snooker landmarks that hasn't been bulldozed by the progress of time. The only vestige of the family's presence here is this plaque presented by BBC Heritage.
There was just one more accolade to achieve for Joe to complete his perfect journey. Even after nearly 30 years of being the best in the world, he still hadn't made the magical 147 break. Neither, for that matter, had any of his competitors. But let's let Joe take up the story.
Well, it was January the 22nd, 1955, when I was faced with this problem on the snooker table. I thought I was heading for the maximum break, which I had been hoping to get for well over 30 years. But I found myself in this almost impossible position. The only shot possible here was to pop this red into this corner pocket. At the same time, keeping position on the black for the next one. Well, I don't suppose I could ever. I then took the black, went up to the final red, and then another black, and took all the colors. And that constituted the 147.
All that at the age of 53. Snooker brought him money and fame, but perhaps it was his very expertise which diminished the championship in his absence.
Black goes down, break now 14.
He continued to play exhibitions and other tournaments, and in 1962 completed the first televised century.
A delightful little screw there to come back on the black ball. And there we have a century on television.
Thanks to his considerable amount of charity work, Joe was awarded an OBE in 1963. He retired from exhibitions 1 year later.
Joe died in 1978, the year I turned professional. He was 77 and he passed away just 2 months after collapsing whilst watching his brother Fred reach the World Championship semi-final at the Crucible. One of snooker's greatest legends, his autobiography is called The Breaks Came My Way. Read it if you want an education into a different era and a glimpse of the man who ensured that the game of snooker has a legacy. But let's give the final word to Joe when Alan Weeks presented him with a special award on Pot Black in 1977.
Well, I'm very, very happy indeed. This is a great surprise and a great pleasure, something that I shall treasure for the rest of my life.
Well, what a beautiful piece of film. That's the only way to describe that. Absolutely stunning.
Brings back so many memories, even way back to the black and white film there. I was a little boy in Coal Island in Northern Ireland, maybe 9 years of age, and they used to show that on Grandstand, Joe Davis playing Fred Davis. And I never ever thought I'd get to meet the great man when I was a little boy, and had the pleasure when I played in Pot Black of meeting him and his brother Fred. But Joe was a fascinating man. And the great bit of advice he gave me was, he said, Dennis, he used to speak so posh, Joe. He said, they can all pop balls. He said, it's all about the percentages and knowing when to go for them. And that still applies today.
There was a little shot there. You were on the end there. You were just telling me as we were watching that.
That was Pot Black. I'll never forget my first Pot Black. I was petrified. When I watched myself afterwards on TV, I looked like I'd just seen a ghost. And I managed to beat John Pullman, however did that. And Joe Davis interviewed me because we had the match finished in under the 22 minutes. They used to like you to try and get the frame finished in about 22 minutes. If you finished early, you did the interview. And it was the great Joe Davis that I chatted with. I'll never forget it.
But Dennis, just great memories there, and this is what snooker means to so many people here. You were saying that you were watching in the 50s on a black and white TV. You know, I used to watch you on Pot Black as well on a Monday night as a kid growing up in Cardiff, and you know that's what makes snooker such essential viewing. You saw the importance of television as well in the sport.
Well, yeah, and people talk about the misspent youth. You look at the great Joe Davis who played around the theatres. Look at the way he was dressed. That's where the players get their dress sense from nowadays. He was always immaculate and wore the bow tie. Okay, the snooker rooms and snooker clubs maybe in the 50s were a little bit seedy, but the professional game, he always carried the mantle there, and it's glad that the game has carried on with those traditions.
Dennis, great to see you. Thank you very much. And yeah, I'll let you get back to the commentary box now. We're about to get